Welcome to Investment Moments with Momentum Investments, where we talk to investment professionals and financial experts about investments and savings. We unpack all things investments to give you insights to help your clients achieve their financial goals. I am Livashni Naika, Communications Specialist at Momentum Investments. Joining me in studio is Sanisha Pakirisamy, Chief Economist at Momentum Investments. Welcome, Sanisha.
Thanks, Lavashni. Good to be here.
This is our final episode of the year, focusing on our year-end wrap. 2025 was anything but predictable. Global trade tensions escalated, yet growth proved surprisingly sturdy. South Africa faced coalition challenges over VAT, but also celebrated a credit rating upgrade and removal from the FATF greylist. Today, we'll unpack the biggest surprises looking ahead to 2026 and even use some creative ways to describe these shifts. Let's get started. Forecasters expected tariffs and fractured supply chains to squeeze margins and slow growth this year. Instead, domestic demand held firmly, and South Africa enjoyed a terms of trade boost from strong gold and platinum prices. So to put you on the spot a little bit, Sanisha, what was the most unexpected economic development this year, globally or locally, and why do you think that happened?
Well, thanks, Lavash. I think it was an extremely eventful year, but if I really had to narrow it down, if you look in the global context, what was quite surprising for me was the extent to which political interference seeped into the global environment. So I think what wasn't a surprise is that when you do get a populist leader going from the back seat of a car to actually holding the steering wheel, you do anticipate a couple of changes. But I think what was out of the ordinary was the extent to which Donald Trump in the United States really shifted things around very quickly to exert a lot more executive control in a very short period of time. And I think that's what was really surprising. The fact that there are now question marks around independence of the US Federal Reserve and monetary policy, question marks around the independence of the judiciary and even the media. I think if we bring it back home, a really nice surprise in South Africa was the upgrade that we got in our sovereign credit rating. I think that we all thought it would come through eventually with structural reforms on the go and fiscal dynamics panning out more positively. But I think this has been quite a positive showing for South Africa.
Thanks, Sanisha. Now let's turn our attention to what's coming next. Your recently published document, Summary of 2025 and Outlook for 2026, points to several pivotal movements ahead. The US midterm elections could reshape fiscal and trade policy, while South Africa's municipal polls may rewire the political map amid service delivery failures. Global central banks are also set to diverge, with China easing, Japan tightening, and the US cautious. So my question is, what major event or trend do you think will define next year, and what ripple effects could that have?
So I think the biggest game changer moving from 2025 into 2026 is that we are going to see some divergence. So for a number of years post the COVID-19 pandemic, we saw that monetary policy across the globe was moving in the same direction. Inflation trends were moving in the same direction. Even fiscal measures were moving in the same direction. I think now going forward, inflation is starting to diverge in a number of economies, and that means that central banks have to react and respond in a different manner. And so that could be quite a good environment for active investing, stock picking, looking for themes rather than just investing in regions. And I think that this is going to be a major focal point for next year.
Interesting. Now let's add a creative twist. 2025 was a year of resilience amid turbulence. Markets adapted quickly, coalitions were tested, and reforms gained traction. It wasn't a boom, but it wasn't a bust either. This question is inspired by a recent Gibbs panel discussion that you attended. If you had to describe 2025 as an animal, what would it be?
So the animal I'm thinking of is one that I found in a Dr. Seuss book when I was reading to my little one evening, and it's called the Arctic hare. And so the Arctic hare is really good at camouflage. And so when it becomes very snowy and cold, the Arctic hare goes white so it can blend into the environment and escape predators. And then during the spring and summer months, it goes brown again to blend in with the environment. And I think this was essentially 2025 in a nutshell. If you were able to camouflage into the environment and shift, you would then be a bit more successful if you were able to reorient trade routes and actually navigate around the rising tide of protectionist policies. You would have had an economy that was far more successful. I think if you had stayed stagnant, were not flexible and agile, and was still very tied to those old traditional blocks and old geopolitical structures, GDP would have faltered, your fiscal dynamics will have fallen out of bed, currencies would have performed far worse.
Sounds like almost like a chameleon as well. So, yes, I love that. Thank you. Now, let's look ahead. 2026 looks like a year of cautious optimism. South Africa's economy catching a quiet current, global politics becoming more brittle as institutional guardrails weaken, and trade alliances shifting under US protectionism. Which animal best represents where the next year is headed?
So maybe to stick with that theme of camouflage, the animal that I would choose is an octopus. But for another reason as well. So an octopus is very, very agile and flexible. It can actually squeeze through any space that is slightly bigger than its beak. And so I think that, going into 2026, it's going to be a year where countries and governments have to be extremely flexible and agile and very strategic in their thinking. There's lots of stories of if you have an octopus in a tank, they try to escape during the night to try and feel out their surroundings, and they use their tentacles in that manner. And I think 2026 is going to be a year where many governments actually have to find their footing in an ever-changing environment. They cannot look at, the geopolitical lines that are being redrawn in the global economy, new trade alliances that are forming. With 8 tentacles, you might actually have very many deals on the table at the same time, and we call this strategic promiscuity. So you could have an energy deal with one country, but a security deal with another country, and a trade deal with yet another to embark on a higher growth journey. And I think that this breaks away from having those traditional blocks of economic and political reliance that we got so used to in the old world order.
Great analogy. It sounds like parenting. As parents, we need to be an octopus. We need extra tentacles. Finally, let's put a score on the year we just had. From record US shutdowns to South Africa's fiscal discipline paying off, 2025 was full of contrasts, with some wins and some setbacks. If you had to rank 2025 out of 10, what score would you give it and what influenced that rating?
Okay, so let's look at the global economy first. I would probably give it somewhere around a 6.5 out of 10. So I know it's a little bit on the fence there. But of course, we did escape a recession. So global growth actually did a bit better than what we anticipated. Inflation was a little bit lower than what we anticipated. And, the global economy continued to chug along. So there were new trade alliances that were drawn, even though we had this rising tide of protectionist policies coming through. Of course, on the negative end, and why that 6.5, I don't believe is higher, is largely because of the policy uncertainty that was ushered in with new populist leaders like President Donald Trump in the US, which really then, set the political stage for more noise around things like trade policy. We had investment a little bit on the back foot as corporates were quite nervous to really put in new money into things like factories and employment and creating new jobs in an environment where there was this level of uncertainty prevailing.
Glad to hear some positive remarks there on this last podcast for the year.
Maybe to talk a little bit about South Africa's score, because I think it did deviate a bit from what we saw on the global side. And so at the start of the year, we thought that growth would have been around the order of 1.5%, which would have been about triple what we achieved in 2024. So that probably, start of the year, I think we all thought that the economy would have come out in South Africa as an 8 out of 10. Of course, along the way, fixed investment disappointed quite sorely on the back of more policy uncertainty related to the government of national unity and the fiscal dynamics that played out at the start of the year. And so that 8 also started to get a bit more tempered towards a 6, 6.5 as the year grew on. I think what also upheld that rating and why I don't think it's lower is that we had some phenomenal surprises that came through, such as much more fiscal discipline that was formulated in the budget, leading to an upgrade in South Africa's sovereign rating. We came off of the Financial Action Task Force's greylist. The currency improved remarkably because we had commodity prices booming, and that really benefited South Africa's terms of trade. And so I think, in the context, even though we didn't end up with an 8 out of 10, we are still above average because of some of these factors that pull through for South Africa.
I think we should leave it there on that positive note. Thank you for sharing your insights, Anisha. That's all the questions I have for today. 2025 showed us that resilience matters, and 2026 promises to be just as dynamic, with political tests, economic shifts, and opportunities for reform. For more insights from our macro research team, visit momentum.co.za. And stay tuned to our channel for more conversations as we navigate 2026. Have a wonderful festive season and see you again in the new year.
Thanks so much, Lavashni.